Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, From Migration to Resilience, Securing Your Atlassian Cloud Transformation. I'm Cindy Lehman, and I'll be your host for today's session. We know that cloud transformation is happening across every industry, but in DevOps specifically, it's not just about adopting new platforms, it's about protecting everything you've built. In this presentation, we're going to look closely at the data migration wave, what many organizations might be overlooking when it comes to resilience, recoverability, and control of their data. Before we get started, just a quick bit of housekeeping. Today's session is being recorded, and we'll send the on-demand recording after the event. If you have questions at any point during the presentation, please submit them using the Q&A panel. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. Joining me today are James Ciesielski, co-founder and Chief Product and Technology Officer at Rewind, where he leads product, engineering, support, and security to build secure systems that protect critical cloud data and keep businesses resilient through disruptions. He is a frequent industry speaker who shares practical insights on SaaS resilience, data protection, DevOps, and AI in product development. Also joining today is Alik Paladian, Senior Solutions Architect at ServiceRocket, where she helps enterprises scale and optimize their Atlassian ecosystems through strategic transformation and scalable Jira Service Management, and Confluence solutions. She specializes in aligning business goals with practical execution, reducing technical debt, and building cloud environments that support long-term growth and data integrity. James and Alik, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll hand it over to you, James.
Hi, and welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. Cloud transformation is happening across every industry. In DevOps, that transformation isn't just about moving data from here to there. It's also about ensuring that you are in as good a data security position or better when it's all said and done. In the next 10, 15 minutes or so, we're going to examine that data migration wave that's taking place. And we're going to unpack what organizations might overlook when it comes to resilience, recovery, and control of their data as they transition to the cloud. So let's get started. I want to start with the big picture. We are in the middle of a broad and accelerating shift in enterprise software. SaaS vendors are moving to the cloud, and they are prioritizing this in their roadmaps. The newest capabilities, security enhancements, and AI-driven features are landing first, and sometimes only in their cloud offerings. That changes the ground rules for enterprise IT. Self-managed deployments that used to feel evergreen are now more likely to move into maintenance mode, with clear migration timelines forcing important technical decisions that have real business implications. Your cloud migration isn't only about moving workloads, though. It's a business risk event, and it needs special attention. Your migration changes where data lives, how access is controlled, how you gather audit evidence, and really, your overall data resilience risks. When done properly, migration becomes a moment to modernize governance and security. But when done hastily, it can lead to operational disruption. A concrete example of this happening today is with Atlassian's deprecation of their data center product. What I want to do next is share a broad way to think about protecting data, maintaining controls, and minimizing business disruption as you plan your upcoming migration. Cloud migration is often presented as a simple lift and shift exercise. Take what's on premise and just move it into the cloud. But in reality, migration is a multi-phase, multi-team initiative, and it comes with really high stakes. For large organizations, a migration project is easily going to take months to get right. Because you're not just moving tools, you're moving years of business knowledge, permissions, automation rules, integrations, historical tickets, and even intellectual property. This is an incredibly high-value environment, and it can't just be changed without careful thought about your compliance, data integrity, and your resilience needs. A lot of teams focus entirely on how to get data into Atlassian Cloud and not on what happens once it's there. That's a gap that we want to help you close today. Atlassian's terms of service are clear. You are responsible for your data. If an AI agent deletes a Jira project or human error wipes out a Confluent space, Atlassian's not going to help you recover it. Many customers assume Atlassian has backups and that they can help you. And listen, credit to Atlassian. They've recently added backups as a paid add-on. But what we're hearing from customers is that it doesn't meet fundamental enterprise needs, which calls for the basic 3-2-1 rule, where customers maintain 3 copies of their data on 2 different mediums, and one of which is not administered by the SaaS provider themselves. Other concerns that we often hear are that capabilities, they're just not built to provide granular item-level recovery. They lack long-term retention options, and they don't meet business resilience strategies. That's just really the tip of the icebergs of what customers are telling us today. At the core of why this is important is something called the shared responsibility model. It's one of those misunderstood aspects of SaaS and operating in the cloud in general. SaaS providers are responsible for the availability and reliability and security of the service they provide, but you, the customer, you are responsible for the availability, reliability, and security of your data. That includes restoring any data that's deleted by accident, recovering from an AI agent that maybe wasn't set up with the right context, meeting compliance expectations for data retention and auditability, and also ensuring continuity in the event of account compromise or perhaps internal misuse. Just because your platform is up and working, it doesn't mean your data is safe. The platform's uptime SLA doesn't guarantee data protection. And the thing I want to underscore here is that Atlassian isn't obliged to help meet your data resilience needs. So what that means is there's a gap. It's called the SaaS resiliency gap. And it's the space between what SaaS providers like Atlassian provide natively and what organizations actually need to recover from incidents within their recovery objectives and to meet their compliance requirements. So let's get into some of the differences between what a trusted third party that helps you achieve your resilience needs provides versus what a SaaS provider provides themselves. So we'll use Atlassian again as an example. Atlassian Brie gives you 14 to 60 days of retention. That's often short of what is expected by a handful of industry compliance frameworks. Atlassian restores tend to be all or nothing. They don't offer granular recovery of a single issue or single page. And backups, they are stored within Atlassian's infrastructure. And that benefits them, but not you. Now, if we compare that to Rewind, we offer configurable retention up to 365 days or longer. You could go as long as you want. We support granular restores where you can restore specific issues, pages, attachments. We can even help you get down to specific attributes on any one of those item types. And maybe most importantly, our backups are stored outside of the SaaS provider, giving you the redundancy and compliance flexibility that you need. Rewind gives you all of these things and a lot more. Now, it's important to understand that Rewind is not a migration tool. We don't move your data. We protect it after it's been transitioned into the Atlassian cloud. Once your Jira, Confluence, or Bitbucket data lands in the cloud, Rewind backs it up continuously. We provide rollback capabilities so you can reverse changes, both intentional and unintentional. We provide you with versioning so you can compare different states of your data as it's changed over time. We offer granular recovery of deleted or altered items so we don't disrupt the rest of your environment in a recovery event. And for phased migrations, we allow teams to move in waves by running backups after each data transfer, giving you the confidence throughout the journey that you can recover if things go wrong. Our goal is really to be a trusted partner and give you the confidence that your operations are resilient long after you cut over and go live. I mentioned the 3-2-1 backup rule earlier. It is the best practice for protecting your critical data. It's a simple framework that builds redundancy into any backup strategy, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud. One more time, the rule breaks down as follows. You've got 3 copies of your data, a primary and at least 2 backups. They are stored on 2 different storage locations. You want to make sure that your copies are stored on separate infrastructures. And most importantly, one of those copies has to be isolated from your SaaS provider. The rule is built around the idea that sound resiliency cannot have a single point of failure. SaaS providers like Atlassian are highly available, but their availability does not map to your resilience. If your backups are in the same environment as your production data, they are vulnerable to the same risks, whether it's misconfiguration, accidental deletion, compromised credentials, rogue AI agents, human error, doesn't matter. The 3-2-1 rule ensures that your data remains recoverable even when a single system, provider, or control layer fails. It instills resilience by design, and Rewind provides both the copy and the separation that you need. Let's talk about compliance for a second. Enterprise teams have strict compliance and audit requirements. Your trusted resiliency partner should help you align to those requirements. Rewind aligns with major frameworks including SOC 2, ISO 27001, GDPR, HIPAA, and DORA. And we provide features like data residency options, exportable backups, bring your own storage, bring your own key, cloud sync. We have immutable audit logs. We offer configurable data retention. We have role-based access controls, and we support single sign-on and multi-factor authentication. Whether you're being audited, or you're pursuing certification, or you just simply need to demonstrate due diligence, we know it's on us to help you meet those compliance requirements without adding any complications or manual overhead. Cloud migration tends to be framed as two technical events. You move data, and then you cut over. In practice, though, the most successful migrations treat the process as a life cycle, and they're thinking about resilience impacts at every stage along the way. Before you migrate, your goal isn't to just map fields and plan a timeline. It's to pinpoint, what does recoverability mean to your organization? In this stage, you should be talking to the people that own your compliance controls, the people who understand your disaster recovery and business continuity context. From there, you want to agree on which data and workflows are the most critical. You want to clearly define your recovery objectives and understand if what you had is even feasible once it's in the cloud. And then you want to decide what level of data ownership and retention you need to support the internal governance and external requirements. During the migration project itself, think in checkpoints rather than a big bang moment. Validate your data integrity, permissions, and business critical workloads as you progress. Confirm that you can rapidly identify any issue and have a plan in place should something not look right. And after you cut over, your resilience instantly becomes operational. That means putting repeatable controls in place, like retention policies and access controls, are must-haves. The people in your organization who are accountable for your disaster recovery and business continuity, they want to know that these things can be demonstrated so they can feel confident about their continuity processes and policies when the auditor comes knocking. Everyone at Rewind knows that we can help during all stages of your migration. Before migration, when you're planning, assessing, and architecting, Rewind provides educational resources and support for your solution partners. During the migration project, as your data starts to land in the cloud, Rewind begins to back it up almost right away. And after cutover, this is where Rewind shines. You now have a production Atlassian cloud environment that Rewind helps ensure stays resilient. With Rewind, you're not just protecting it in one moment, you are continuously protecting it over time. So it's time to close the resiliency gap. Don't assume native platform tools will protect you from every mistake, every agentic hallucination, or any compliance issue. They just won't. Trusted partners like Rewind ensure you have long-term recoverability. We help you meet your audit and regulatory expectations. We help reduce any downtime and disruptions, and we help you regain and maintain control over your cloud data. We are here to help you move to the cloud with confidence and stay resilient at every step of the way. Next, we are going to move to a roundtable discussion hosted by Technology Advice, where we will hear insights from our expert at ServiceRocket, Alik, a global platinum Atlassian solution partner with deep experience leading the complex Atlassian cloud migration.
Welcome back, everyone. In the presentation James just shared, James framed cloud migration as a transformation journey, not a simple lift and shift. So now we'll go behind the scenes to learn what expert teams actually do to stay resilient before, during, and after migration. The message we want to drive home is that roughly 90% of the work happens before cutover. The cutover may be the moment, but the preparation is the work. So let's dive in. James, you set up migration as a transformation, not a lift and shift. What's one misconception you wish teams would let go of when they hear about cloud migration, especially around what done actually means?
I mean, teams that assume if they're transitioning to a managed service like a SaaS application, if they assume that everything is managed on their behalf, that is probably one of the biggest misconceptions that we see. As I mentioned in the presentation, there's this thing called the shared responsibility model, and it exists whether you choose to read the terms and conditions or not, but it basically tells you that you and you alone are responsible for your data. The platforms don't have you covered. So your definition of done once you've completed the migration really needs to include and consider what resilience means. You need to take the time and plan for it.
Alik, how about what's your perspective here?
Yeah, great question. The biggest misconception I would say is that teams think done means, okay, the data is moved, we're good. But actually, they tend to look at cloud migrations as just a copy and paste of data. But moving the data is just halfway there. Done actually means that your governance is live, your users are productive. And if your users can't do their day-to-day job, even if the data has been moved, your migration basically failed. So if you treat it like just a copy and paste job, then you aren't really migrating, you're just moving your technical debt from one environment to a more expensive environment.
Thank you. So we've said the cutover is sort of the last mile of a much longer race. Can you all give me a sense, what is the real work before migration that makes the go live smooth, and what helps it keep from getting messy in the first couple of weeks after the migration?
I can go first. I mean, from my perspective, it's all about reviewing your internal controls and your compliance requirements well in advance of that cutover action. You want to understand how that disaster recovery plan and business continuity plan that all major enterprises have these days, you want to know how that needs to change. And you want to make sure that your team knows how to react rather than stumble and figure it out when an active incident may be occurring. You also probably want to make sure that you run a tabletop exercise. If you don't know what that is, it's an opportunity to bring all the relevant stakeholders together and sort of simulate what an event may look like. And this is a fantastic way to make sure that the revisions that you've made to those different policies and procedures are actually grounded in the realities of what it means to be operating in this new environment. And it gives you a sense of where your blind spots might be.
Interesting. Alik, do you agree?
Totally agree. And again, touching base again, before the migration, there's the discovery and design phase. That's the most crucial phase in migration. It's the architectural alignment basically to make sure that your workflows that you had on-prem will actually work in cloud. What needs to be changed? What are the integrations that you had on-prem? What do they look like in cloud? Is it the same? Does it change? So just making sure that your cloud environment that you're baking data into actually works the way you want it to work, and it's not just a lift and shift and everything should work the way it was.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, let's talk about what would happen when things go a little sideways. Alik, when migrations do go wrong, what are kind of some of the top 2 or 3 patterns you most often see?
Yeah, great question. I think the most common one and the most popular one is the automation trap, we call it, which is basically teams bring over old scripts from on-prem that, worked fine in their projects, but because cloud is very interconnected, they can start hitting limits in the API, which basically doesn't just stall out that script, it can affect other integrations. So, for example, if you have integrations with Slack, with GitHub, stalls out the whole instance, basically. Another thing that we see a lot is the permission confusion. So the assumption that the permissions, the way they are on-prem, are the same in cloud. So, the way permissions pass down through a project is different in cloud. So we often see teams accidentally, open up a project to an audience that they're not supposed to see that project because, there was that assumption that it should just act the same way it acted on-prem. And then finally, and James touched on this in his slide deck, is like the cloud is managed myth of like just the myth of, Atlassian or any other SaaS platform really handles everything and you can just skip over your backup strategy, but it's really not. You also need to think about that in the beginning and focus on that safety net before you even start your migration journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, James, what's different in cloud when it comes to recoverability and audit evidence?
I mean, the biggest thing I think is a misunderstanding of where the SaaS provider's responsibility ends and where the customer's responsibility begins. It's that shared responsibility model. Recovery objectives themselves, they aren't really entirely in your control either when you're operating in the cloud. Ali kind of just touched on it. Oftentimes you interface through these third-party APIs, through APIs that the provider themselves gives you, but they themselves are actually regulated and controlled with these rate limits. And so you have to ensure that your recovery objectives are aligned to those constraints that exist within the cloud. There's also an element of just understanding the underlying cloud data model as well, understanding the relationship between things and how changing one thing over here may impact something over there. Typically just because of the way you have to interface with the SaaS provider itself. It's not as simple as just going into a database or looking at a file system. You're limited by what the cloud provider actually exposes to you through their development documentation and through their APIs themselves. And then from an audit perspective, most cloud services tend to have like point-in-time activity logs, but these aren't really designed for questions that auditors usually ask, which is, prove this configuration was in place during the audit period, during the period that we're actually auditing, right? Or demonstrate that you had continuous protection of this particular data type over the same audit period. And so it just kind of becomes harder to put all of that stuff together at audit time.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. So from the services side, what is the most underestimated risk around governance and permissions? Who can change what? How does that turn into problems, et cetera?
Yeah, great question. The biggest risk I would say that I've seen in a lot of cloud migrations is people don't realize how much connected cloud is, how more connected it is from old, the on-prem environment. A small mistake maybe on-prem can just stay in that one project, but it will have a ripple effect across the entire site in cloud. So not knowing who owns what, who has permissions to delete, who has permissions to change something, actually, has a larger effect when you're in cloud. So I would say that's the blast radius. It's not just a broken ticket; it's company-wide stall. If you don't decide who owns what before you move, then you end up with this governance drift that is highlighted from day one after going live. Is like everybody has access to everything, but nobody knows how to lock it down again.
Yeah, wow. I want to ask, do you have a typical horror story that you see about this? We might not have time for the whole story, but maybe sort of what happened, what caused it, and what would have prevented it?
Yeah, for sure. I think a common story I would say that I've seen across environments is a bulk change disaster. So, a team tries to clean up after they're live on production, and they want to delete a custom field, for example. And if they don't have that knowledge that the custom field is globally shared across a lot of projects, that delete button can actually wipe out that data from multiple projects. And that's because they thought, it's just a duplicate. I can delete it, but it actually had an effect for multiple departments, multiple projects. So in that case, the prevention would be, having that two-way safety net. So first of all, having a process-driven safeguards, and at ServiceRocket, we do that a lot, which is a field impact check. Before you hit the delete button, check if that field or that workflow or that permission scheme, what is it sharing? What's the global permission? What's the global effect on it before you hit that delete button? So it has to be some steps in it, not just anybody can delete it. And secondly, you need the technical safeguards, obviously, from Rewind, for example. Instead of spending weeks trying to manually bring back all the data, it can be just minutes of an undo button.
Wow. Yeah. So there are a lot of ways that this could potentially go wrong. But it sounds like the good news is that most of this is preventable if we treat the pre-migration work like the actual work. So I'd like to actually spend a little more time discussing the preparation, because it sounds like that's where we really could sink or swim. When you say you do discovery first, what does that actually mean? What are you assessing and mapping before anyone touches production, especially around governance, permissions, and compliance requirements?
Yeah, so discovery is basically, think about it as we're getting a clear picture of your current state environment. So think about it as, an X-ray or diagnostics of your current environment, what it has. So we're assessing your project structures, your permissions, your workflows, especially integrations and apps. So it could be third-party apps, it could be custom integrations built in-house. So we sit down in workshops with stakeholders, figure out what's actually business critical. We aren't just moving data for the sake of moving data. We're mapping out how you want to work with this cloud environment from day one. And after discovery, the output is a migration playbook, which is basically your step-by-step guide and the plan that covers, how the integrations are going to be moved and what projects go before the other, what's a business critical, and, the phases of the migration. So we just want to map that at the beginning, and that's why we spend a lot of time in discovery, because we want to ensure that there's no surprises after cutover.
Got it. Thank you. James, how do you help teams define their success beyond we moved the data? What should be true on day one for resilience and for continuous compliance?
I mean, I've been doing this long enough that for me, it starts with looking to your compliance team and hoping that they look back at you with the double thumbs up. They are the ones that ultimately are accountable for all of the controls and all of the business systems and processes that help keep operational continuity. So they really want to make sure that you've looked at the risks to the business that come with the migration and understand how that translates to, the business operation needs. So they want to make sure that you've defined, what does recoverable mean? What is important in that data set? How fast can you bring it back? What's the impact when you have to bring it back? They want you to make sure that you've looked at retention requirements that maybe you have to deal with and that you have those well defined. At the end of the day, it really just means demonstrating controls that are in place so that not only is the business safe and secure, but that when you are audited for any of those compliance needs, that those audits get passed with flying colors.
And no surprises.
And no surprises,
great.
Exactly.
Thank you. It occurs to me that not all data and workflows are equal. How do you help teams decide what gets the most attention? Sort of what absolutely must work on day one and be compliant? Alik, I'll throw this to you.
Thank you. So that's why, like I said, discovery is very crucial. So we do a business impact. We look at the business impact. Basically, not every Jira project is created equally. Some are just archives of old data. So while others are actually the engine, your whole company. So we look at how the workflows, permissions are connected to each other. If a workflow in one project, let's say, is tied to your customer portal or core integration, that's not negotiable. That's a very critical project to move. And then we identify those points basically and put these pieces together to what absolutely must work on day one. So when they open up their laptops Monday morning, we don't want any disruptions because it's very critical to the business. And we don't treat everything at the same priority. We make sure the most important parts of the business are moved first, validated, and compliant before we move into the other second-hand priority and third-hand priority.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, James, I know you talked about the resilience gap earlier. What are the questions around resilience gap that teams should be answering before they migrate, and any equivalent compliance questions that might go alongside of that?
Again, I think this all comes back to understanding what the existing compliance controls are within your organization. You want to understand really what needs to change once that switch gets flipped to be operating actually in that cloud environment. So it comes back to what is the most important data that's now being held within these systems? Who has access to that data, and how are we monitoring that only those people who are supposed to have access do have access? And how are we actually controlling that over time? And then from a resiliency and recoverability perspective, how are we actually making sure that if something was to happen to that data, that we have a effective strategy to ensure that we can bring it back within, the overarching business requirements without impacting the overall operations of the business? Those are the questions that really you want people diving into.
Thank you. That makes sense. For big enterprise migrations, when do we want that backup and restore strategy in place so that it's ready for day one, and then also so it can support hypercare when user error inevitably happens?
Yeah, I can start. I would say as early as you can. So earliest, like during discovery and design, you need your compliance needs, your your compliance needs, your governance requirements, the use cases all defined. So tools and processes are ready to go live. So, bringing in that language during discovery is really important while you're defining what your migration looks like. So you don't have any surprises once you're in the production.
Yeah, I agree. I've said it before, right? These businesses have existing compliance controls. They should really be starting there at the same time they're talking about the genesis of the overall migration project and trying to get a firm grasp on like what needs to change to ensure that we remain compliant throughout this entire process. Because again, the last time you want to be thinking about this is after the migration and you're dealing with an incident. That's when conversations get awkward, they get tough, and it's just the wrong time. Earlier the better. Alik said it best.
Yeah, yeah. So then is there anything in particular you need validated up front so continuous compliance and auditability don't fall apart later?
Scope needs to be explicit. You shouldn't be assuming anything. It's not a justifiable defense to an auditor to say like, oh, we didn't know this was important. You should know what's important to your business, and you want to make sure that that's clear to all of the relevant stakeholders in front of you. When you're thinking about retention policies, it's a really good idea to try and tie those to actual business obligations. If you're sitting around a table and you say, oh, we're going to set the retention policy to 90 days because that seemed acceptable, that's probably the wrong way of going about doing it. You really want somebody to look at the business needs and say something like, well, our MSA contracts tell us that we have to retain data for a year, and therefore that's what we're setting it to. Or the industry standard for us is, whatever, X. You want to make sure that you're aligning the business needs, or you're aligning to business needs, and that it's defensible, that you can point to something and say, well, here's the exact reason why we're doing it this way.
Yeah.
And then the third thing I could maybe touch on quickly is the chain of custody, which just basically means like who can access the data, both the source data and the backup data. What are the conditions under which they can access it? And more importantly, is that access logged? Because the reality is if the backup itself isn't auditable, then it's not an effective tool for evidence when it's time to actually go through an audit.
Right. Okay. So then, Alik, how early do you typically pull backup vendors into the project so that we can nail down all these requirements?
As soon as we start mapping the data in discovery, we don't want to wait until the week of migration to find out if a backup tool supports the use case that we're experiencing or we found in our discovery. So by pulling a backup vendor like Rewind early on, you can actually test a restore in your staging environment. That gives your stakeholders peace of mind, because then they know how it works before you're touching any production data.
Thank you. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so it's right before migration day. What are our last readiness checks?
Before flipping the switch, I would say before, right before the migration, we're looking at the parity. So yes, there's a UAT that happens, testing that happens, but it's happening in a staging environment. So we're looking for parity. We need to confirm that our production environment matches our staging environment, where it actually matters. We know that it's not going to be 100% mirrored. So we validate the system settings that usually I see cause delays, things like performance limits, configuration constraints that might be different in production than they are in staging. We also double check connectivity and network settings because, production often has more security layers than the staging environment has. And then finally, we make sure that the permission mappings are 100% accurate, that we have a final sign off as well from the stakeholders. And if any of these don't align, that's your no-go signal. We don't want to move forward until we know that your landing pad is just as ready as the data you're moving.
Got it. So we've done all the prep. We've cleared the gate. Now we're in the window. So we're about ready to flip the switch. This is where the discipline really counted. What does that disciplined execution actually look like?
Think about execution, and this is honestly, it has a lot of adrenaline to it. Think about it as like a controlled release. We aren't just uploading data and hoping for the best. We have clear roles. Everyone knows what's happening when, and we have specific monitoring as well. So, you have a dashboard. We're watching the logs in real time so that we can catch any stalls early. If something starts to lag, we don't guess. We know what to do. Also, part of the discipline is freezing any risky work during. So no one should be tweaking any workflows or any configurations while you're going through the migration. That should be very, strict on no one changes anything while you're doing the migration. And finally, you have to have a triage plan because yes, you can prepare and it's like 99% you're good, but then there's always this edge case that happens while you're doing the migration. So a triage plan is very important. If something deviates from the script, you know exactly what to do. Even we actually make sure that the third-party vendors also know that the migration is happening that weekend. So, if there's an app that's giving us trouble migrating, we have the vendors on call to help us and support us to make sure everything is moving smoothly. So it's like you're landing a plane and everybody's on board and just watching and monitoring.
Yeah, and you're covering every single possible failure point.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's amazing. So James, when we flip that switch, what is the best way to reduce risk from human error and automation, especially when it comes to integrations and API workflows, to avoid creating any compliance gaps?
I mean, there's really two things I think people can focus on. Alik touched on this before as well. I think she said it perfectly. You really want to just make sure you are reducing the blast radius as much as you can. And from my perspective, that means doing things like tightening change control. And I mean, like for everything, humans, AI, third-party integrations, you really just want to make sure that they are all subject to least privileged principles so that they can only operate on the data that they are authorized to operate on. And they can't do something destructive across, your entire data set. The second, we are a company that provides recoverable solutions and data resilience solutions. So you really want to make sure that you are ready to recover quickly if something goes sideways. Hope is not a strategy. Somebody else said that, someone smarter than me said that, but it fits very well here. Hope is not a strategy. Have a run book that explains that when this happens over here, we are going to do that over there, which involves, this group of people. This is the escalation path. Here's how we get a hold of them. And these are all the tools that we are going to need in order to actually execute this particular run book. Those are the two things I would focus on.
Thank you. I really like that. Hope is not a strategy. All right. So in this imaginary scenario, go live has happened. Now comes the part that some teams might underestimate, hypercare. What does a good hypercare period actually look like? What is hypercare? How long is an appropriate hypercare? Who's involved? Alik, Can you explain this to us?
For sure. So think about hypercare. It's not just, it's a waiting for emails. If something goes wrong, somebody submits a request. It's actually a very structured period. Usually it's about 2 weeks, but depending on the project we're working on, it might be more or less. But it's basically a dedicated window and a clear escalation path. So you have clear escalation channels. You have people on board online, making sure everything is working correctly. So we do a daily review of every issue that comes in so we can spot patterns and see where it went wrong during cutoff. And the reality is it's the real user engagement is the ultimate test. You can test 99% of your workflows in staging, but you always have these edge cases. Like I said, a team may work differently in a project, and then that edge case comes live during the cutover period, and once you're live in cloud. So sometimes hypercare reveals the detail that was missed in discovery, or sometimes even it was tested very superficially. So you want to have that dedicated time, dedicated team, and the escalation channels, and it's a very structured program that runs after the migration to make sure we don't have any disruptions to your business.
Yeah. So then what do teams need to learn quickly post-migration to prevent governance drift, misconfigurations, and any kind of continuous compliance failures? James, I'll go to you.
Yeah, I would start with making sure that your admins are trained on what it means to be operating in the cloud, what kind of cloud specific controls come with that, and how that differs from what they were used to when operating on-prem or within a data center. I think they got to work on reestablishing their governance norms, things like understanding who can change what, understanding how change control actually works, what the review process looks like. And then I think there's also this element of trust but verify. It's a good idea to have some level of monitoring, I think, in place to make sure that you are proactively catching permission and maybe configuration changes early, so that you mitigate the possibility of any kind of drift down the road that could come about if you didn't have those controls in place.
Sure. Yeah. So let's go down the road a little bit then. Once the project is wrapped up, you started talking about operational resilience. So what does that mean in this context? What should teams do on a monthly or quarterly basis to stay recoverable and continuously compliant?
Yeah. So at this point, you've established what it means to be operating in the cloud. You've updated your policies, your procedures, and your run books. So the best thing that you could possibly be doing over time is making sure that you practice those things and you're making sure that they are staying up to date with the changes that are happening in your environment. You want to develop the muscle memory so that the people who are identified in those different documents as being critical, they remain engaged and they understand what their roles are, so that when an incident does take place and you tap Bob on the shoulder, Bob isn't looking at you saying like, "Oh, really? I'm involved in this." That's a bad scene. You don't want that happening. And then if you go back to what I said before, if you can't be monitoring for things like permission and configuration changes, what you want to be doing is at least making sure you've set time aside to review them yourself manually, and making sure that they are in line with what your expectations are. Because the bottom line here is your resilience program, it has to be this continued investment. It's not just something that you do once and then you put on a shelf and you pull down when you need it. The best programs are the ones that see a constant investment, because the nature of things is that stuff changes and you need to make sure that your program is changing along with it.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we're almost at time, so I'm just going to close with one quick question. If someone from the audience is migrating this year, what's one thing they should do Monday morning to reduce risk and maybe make that hypercare period less painful?
I can start.
Sure.
I've been saying discovery a lot throughout this whole roundtable. So start your discovery now. If you're planning to migrate, start your discovery now. Audit your admin permission and get your backup safety net in place. You don't want to find out who has access to delete something or to change something on your migration day. So start early, do all your discovery first if you're planning to migrate.
James, what would you add?
Yeah, I would go back to making sure that you're involving people who are responsible and accountable for your governance, risk, and compliance frameworks, and ensuring that they are part of the conversation from day one. They are the ones who are going to help you define what recoverable means. They're going to help you validate what the retention needs are for the business. And they're going to make sure that you can actually restore, recover, and maintain business continuity and resilience long after the process is completed.
Amazing. Thank you both. Our big takeaway here, prep is the work, cutover is the moment, and resilience plus continuous compliance is the operating model. Thank you to our audience for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more, head to rewind.com and servicerocket.com. Thanks again for spending part of your day with us. We hope to see you at a future event.